Well, my title for today is Why We Still Need to Take Creationism Seriously. I am that really cheerful person who gives these really depressing talks. So here we go. 5 years ago, federal district court judge struck down a policy in Dover, Pennsylvania, requiring the teaching of intelligent design. That was a good thing. At heart, I agree. At heart, Kitzmiller versus Dover was an Establishment Clause case, but science played a key role in the trial, with both sides contending over both the content and nature of science. Margaret Talbot's article in the New Yorker captured the essence beautifully. For 6 weeks, the courtroom of Judge John E. Jones III was like the biology class you wished you could have taken. Each of our expert witnesses, in the back, the theologian Jack Haught, scientists Ken Miller and Kevin Padian, though Kevin is not in this picture, philosopher Rob Pennock, historian, philosopher Barbara Forrest, and educational specialist Brian Alters, made the point that science depends on methodological naturalism and intelligent design depends on supernatural explanations, and for that and other reasons was outside of science. The guy in the blue jacket there is the intrepid former NCSC staff member and legal team advisor Nick Motzke, one of the unsung heroes of the Kitzmiller versus Dover case. But that's not all, as they say on late-night television. We have a Supreme Court decision, Edward versus Aguillard, that strikes down the teaching of creation science. And we have a series of federal district court cases that have used Edwards to strike down various efforts of individual teachers to freelance the teaching of creationism. Well, that's good. We got that out of the way. We don't have to worry about creationism anymore, right? Court decisions truly have provided genuine victory for our side in the creation and evolution controversy. Imagine where we would be if we didn't have a First Amendment that required schools to be neutral toward religion. I suggest we would have one of three scenarios. Either we would have the widespread teaching of creation science and intelligent design, or the teaching of evolution would quietly be dropped at the K-12 level, leaving it for university students to discover. Or, this is an interesting thought, the mainstream religious community would have strenuously objected to the presentation of biblical literalism in science class and kept creation science and intelligent design out. And evolution would be included because it's compatible with their theology. Fortunately, it's a hypothetical that we'll never have to explore because we do have a First Amendment, we do have an Establishment Clause, and indeed the Constitution has protected us in every case. On the other hand, one of the best examples that we have of evolution is the creationist movement, which has successfully, I would suggest to you, adapted to the legal environment. If I may summarize, creation science begat intelligent design. Intelligent design, when it in turn was shown by the courts to be religious advocacy and therefore unconstitutional to teach, begat as products of the Edwards versus Aguillard strategy two approaches. One, the encouragement for the teaching of evidence against evolution, and the second strategy, the encouragement of the teaching of alternative theories to evolution. Now, we are very close to a university here. In fact, it's very easy to find lots of universities in New York. You don't have to go far. If you go to any of the science departments in any of those universities and you say, tell me, what are the alternative theories to evolution? You will be met with, what? We don't know of any alternative theories to evolution. No alternative scientific theories to evolution, that's for sure. If you go to the proponents of the teaching of alternative theories of evolution, well, big surprise, you find that in content it's exactly what they used to call intelligent design and creation science. Similarly, if you go to other scientists and you say, please give me the list of evidence against evolution so I can teach it in my high school science class, they will look at you with great bewilderment because, as scientists, we don't have any lists of evidence against evolution. The proponents of evidence against evolution, of course, refer you back to the intelligent design arguments and the creation science arguments. Basically, what we are seeing is creationism has not gone away, it's just camouflaged itself into new terminology. And we need to take it seriously, because the new approaches bring creationism into the K-12 curriculum through the back door. And the name may have been changed, but not the content. Those of you who are familiar with the creationism history, the creationism movement over the years, will recognize a pattern here, not just the morphing of creationism, but also this idea of denigrating evolution, of teaching alternatives to evolution. Shortly after the Edwards versus Aguillard decision came out, the Institute for Creation Research, in its little Acts and Facts pamphlet, published a suggestion to those teachers who wanted to teach creationism that even though Edwards had struck down creation science as being unconstitutional, they still had some loopholes within Edwards that they could exploit. They wrote, "In the meantime, school boards and teachers should be strongly encouraged at least to stress the scientific evidences and arguments against evolution in their classes. Not just arguments against some proposed evolutionary mechanism, but against evolution per se, even if they don't want to recognize these as evidences and arguments for creation." To the creationists, evidence against evolution is evidence for creation. You don't have to actually support the creationist special creation point of view. You merely have to destroy the credibility of evolution, and creationism wins by default. This, in fact, has been codified, shall we say, in their overall argumentative structure, what one judge referred to as a contrived dualism, what they call the two-model approach, in which they believe there are only two possibilities. There's either special creation or there's evolution. So all you have to do, disprove evolution, and guess what's left? So this denigration of evolution strategy is something that we've been putting up with for quite a while. Far from creationism disappearing after Kitzmiller versus Dover, in 2005, NCSE, and 2005 being the year that Kitzmiller was decided, the NCSE tracked 12 anti-evolution bills in state legislatures. In 2006, we had 16 bills, including some in somewhat odd places like New York and Utah. In 2007, we had another dozen. In 2008, there were 9 bills. By the way, please do recognize that these bills don't die of their own accord. These bills die because somebody like you in some town or country, or town or state in this country, called up their state legislator and said, "We don't think this is a good bill for the science education of state X. I really encourage you, my elected representative, to vote against this in the education committee." These bills die because the people NCSE work with, who really are the unsung heroes in this controversy, do the difficult work of trying to influence their elected officials, of writing the letters to the editor, of doing what needs to be done in terms of the grassroots politics to keep these laws from being passed. And they are really the ones who deserve the credit. We may provide the information and the advice, but if we didn't have the people on the ground following our advice and doing the hard work, the situation would be far, far worse than it is. In 2008 was sort of a bad year for us because the Louisiana Science Education Act, formerly known as the Louisiana Academic Freedom Act, and that'll become significant in a moment, passed. All of the bills that I have shown you up until now, and all the bills I will show you, except for the Louisiana Act, did die in committee, which is exactly where we want them to die. If these bills get out on the floor, they are very difficult to stop because it's very hard to vote against them for reasons which I'll try to illustrate. The Florida bill listed here was only defeated because the clock ran out. It was defeated by a whisker of time, if you will. And this was a very bad bill for our side of this issue. In 2009, there were 9 more bills. In 2010, we got off easy, only 5 bills. I wonder what else might have been going on in 2010 that might have distracted people from this issue. Y'all can remember. But this year, we're back to the tried and true. There were 9 bills, and unlike the fate of previous efforts, one of them, the bill in Tennessee, looks like it's going to pass. Most of these bills, about 40 of them, and since 2005, can be classed as academic freedom bills. Let me tell you a little bit about academic freedom bills, because this is what we have to deal with these days. The granddaddy of the academic freedom bill movement, if you will, was a bill that came out in Alabama in 2004, and it was titled an Academic Freedom Act. This was a very interesting bill because it didn't mention creationism, it didn't mention religion, it didn't mention any of the traditional kinds of language that we were familiar with. But it basically took the perspective that teachers should be protected against challenges of their academic freedom. So K-12 teachers and 2- and 4-year college professors who, quote, hold a different opinion from textbooks on evolution cannot be disciplined. And the sponsor of the bill self-described himself as a champion of academic freedom. This is all about academic freedom, folks. This is not about the teaching of creationism. Of course not. Only people here are supporters of civil liberties. Right. I want to remind you of these, of these 3 cases I mentioned a moment ago. These 3 cases, the LeVake case, the Pelosi case, and the Webster case, were all cases back in the 90s or early 2000s, in which a teacher decided to just go ahead and teach creationism, even though there was no statute in the district, much less in the state, requiring the teacher to do this. In each of these cases, the administration said, nah, not so fast. This is not in our curriculum. We think this is unconstitutional. Knock it off. In each of these 3 cases, the teacher sued the district for his academic freedom to teach what he thought would be good science. Now, in each of these cases, the teachers lost because there is a lot of case law that supports the authority of a district to tell a teacher what to teach. Now, on first hearing, you think, gosh, that sounds really awful. Boy, that's really the opposite of academic freedom. This is a terrible thing. High school teachers should have academic freedom. But think about that for just a second. There's a big difference between what goes on in a high school class or junior high class and what goes on at the university level. When we think of academic freedom, we usually think of it at the university level. We think of it in terms of research, in terms of freedom of thought, in terms of being able to publish on things that one wants to. Even a university professor can't bring up, French medieval art in a class on biochemistry. I mean, there are certain restrictions on what you can teach, even if it's the college level. You have to at least teach the subject matter. Constraints are even stronger at the K-12 level because the community has an interest in continuity from class to class and from school to school in a school district. You don't want the teachers over here teaching A, B, and C, and the teachers over here teaching X, Y, and Z, and then the next year the kids go into the next class and one of those groups of students is going to be severely handicapped for further study. So you need to have some sort of continuity. You need to have an actual curriculum that teachers follow. Now that doesn't mean that teachers have to march lockstep and they have no intellectual ability to help their students understand the material in new and innovative ways, or that they can't bring anything into the curriculum. But it does mean that if your curriculum says, thou shalt teach evolution, you don't undermine that. Okay? Basically, the way the course law has, the way the codes have been interpreted in legal cases is that if a teacher agrees to, if a teacher signs a contract in a school district, you have agreed to teach that district's curriculum. And so each of these school districts were in their right to tell the teachers to not teach creationism. And the courts upheld this across the board. And that was the grounds, by the way, in all 3 of these cases. In none of these cases was the reality of evolution or the reality of creationism considered. It was just, no, you got the right to tell your teacher what to teach, so go away. And that was the way it worked out. Now, It's my hypothesis, and the only way I can test this hypothesis is if one of the intelligent design people tells me, and they just don't call me up and chat late at night, so chances are I'll never really be able to test this hypothesis. But what I think is happening is that the various legislators around the country who want their teachers to teach creationism, and there's about 30% of teachers, according to survey research, that would really like to teach creationism along with evolution in their science classes. I think that a lot of these legislators looked at these cases and thought, that's kind of a bum deal. Looks like a teacher teaching creationism doesn't have the right to do so. Let's pass a law that will protect a teacher who decides to venture out like one of these three gentlemen here. That's what I think is the inspiration for these academic freedom laws that have come up, in which a teacher is protected from discipline by an administrator, a district, whatever, if they go ahead and freelance like this. So this is an interesting issue. Now, I know that I'm speaking before a group of skeptics, and actually you are an incredibly attentive group. I must have scared the socks off of you at this point, because there's, those of you watching this on the videotape later on, you could hear a pin drop here. I mean, everybody is just, I mean, you all look really sad, but you all are really being intently listening, and this is very flattering to a speaker. Thank you so much. But because I know you are all nerds about this kind of thing, I am going to inflict upon you something that one of my colleagues, Anton Mates, did. He produced this phylogeny of the Academic Freedom Acts. Now, there aren't very many audiences I could show this to, because talk about glazing over fast, but you would probably appreciate this more than many. Anton's phylogeny has not actually been brought up to date in the last year or so, but the basic idea is there. The original Alabama bill talked about the rights of students and teachers to ascribe to alternative views, alternative theories. Alternative theories is an interesting phrase. Historically, alternative theories is a euphemism for creationism. Okay, that's what alternative theories means. The Alabama bill was improved by the Discovery Institute, and later versions dropped the reference to alternative theories, I believe, because of this previous historical baggage that it carried, and this would make it legally a little bit less vulnerable, shall we say. And then eventually the Discovery Institute came up with its own model bill, which referred directly to the Edwards versus Aguilar decision, referring to scientific critiques of prevailing scientific theories could be taught. And it strengthens what we refer to as the Santorum language. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Santorum Amendment in a bit. Now, this is the root also of the Florida bill that I mentioned before, almost passed, and was a very kind of scary thing for us. This tree represents another strain of Academic Freedom Acts, originating from a 2006 policy passed in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana, promoted by the Louisiana Family Forum, which is a conservative Christian organization. Now, this series of bills, are couched in terms of encouraging the critical thinking of students, critical analysis of scientific theories. The Louisiana Academic Freedom Act passed a couple of years later, and it was introduced by the author of the Ouachita Parish bill when this man was elected to the State House of Representatives. Naturally, later on, the bill was, of course, improved yet further. The idea that an administrator cannot censor materials, which will come in, I'll tell you in a moment why that is significant. And the idea that administrators have the responsibility of guiding teachers to select material that they can use to provide this critical analysis of ideas. And within this particular branch of Academic Freedom Acts, evolution is often bundled with other issues that the religious right is concerned about, such as origin of life, global warming, and human cloning. I mean, how many of you, those of you who might have children in junior high or high school, they don't study cloning in high school, you know. And students, our laboratory today is we will a little buckle smear and we'll see you. No, I mean, this is just totally nuts. Nobody's worried about kids learning about human cloning except for religious conservatives. Now, naturally, because we are using this phylogenetic and genetic analogy here, these two strains, much as in horizontal gene transfer, have influenced one another. These are not pure strains, shall we say. But clearly, this is already more detail than most human beings really want to have. But just to give you an idea, there's two basic strains of this Academic Freedom Act going on, although there's some borrowing back and forth. The left side is the full range of scientific views, freedom of expression, students have permission to attack evolution, and so forth. The right-hand strain bundles evolution with global warming and uses the critical analysis, justification, and so forth and so on. Now, I want to take a look at some of the wording of some of these bills because I think it's useful for you as citizens to know what's swirling around you in some of the neighboring states, and because I think it helps to illustrate how the language has changed over the years. If we go back to the 1980 and the Arkansas Senate Bill 590, the first equal time for creation science bill to pass, there was no question the goal of this bill. It was to teach creationism, albeit creationism as science. But this was the whole goal here. And it was just straight up teach creation science, balance evolution science, and nobody here but us scientists, right? The version of this kind of bill, Equal Time for Creation Science, that was passed by the Louisiana legislature, is the one that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But the wording is basically the same. You don't know how much this pains me to show you slide after slide of text. I have very strong attitudes about PowerPoint abuse, and one of the abusive aspects of PowerPoint that people use is bulleted slides. And I like my PowerPoints to illustrate my talk, but alas, what I need to talk about now is words, so I have to inflict words upon you, so I apologize. Please forgive me, I'll never be bad again. There was a law that almost passed in Tennessee in 1996 that was particularly draconian. It would punish teachers for teaching that evolution was fact, not theory. From the early 1990s on, we saw efforts to disclaim evolution, particularly of this theory, not fact, misrepresenting the scientific definition of theory, of course, in favor of the street definition. You know, when I'm speaking publicly someplace and people stand up and say, evolution is a theory, why don't we just teach evolution as a theory? And I say, well, heavens, yes, we teach evolution as a theory. Of course evolution is a theory. Theories are so much more important than facts. And there's this. Because to people outside of science, facts trump theories. Theories explain facts from the scientific standpoint. Theories are abstract, inferential explanations. They're much more powerful than facts. A good theory does not grow up into a fact, or a good law does not grow up into a fact. I mean, that's not the way it works. But there's been a whole bunch of these evolution is a theory, not a fact kinds of laws. And this Tennessee bill, as I say, came very, very close to passing. And imagine the chilling effect if you were a Tennessee teacher and somebody in your legislature passed a law that said that if you are found guilty of teaching evolution as fact, not theory, we'll fire you. How excited would you be about the unit on evolution coming up? Well, of course not. You'd be worried about little Jimmy in the front row there who never did like you turning you in. So there are really bad things like this that went on. And of course, the classic, although not the first, theory not fact example was the Cobb County textbook sticker of 2002. Now, this was litigated in 2004 through 2006. It took forever to get through with this case. And the district court did come down on the sticker being unconstitutional. The appeals court sat on the case for a very long time, finally sent it back to trial, vacating the decision, and the parties settled out of court. So, the issue of disclaimers is still a little bit up there in the air. But This textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact, regarding the origin of living things. This material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically considered. Nature magazine, of course, parodied this, as well as did a number of other people, publications and cartoons, and this seems very silly. But disclaimers were and are a very popular way to try to get evolution out of the curriculum, or at least get it reduced in popularity, and leave the door open for alternatives. Now, a major influence on science education in this country was the reform movement that began in the 1990s with the establishment of science education standards in every state. This was followed in 2001 by the passage of No Child Left Behind, components of which emphasized the importance of standards. That was important, but also high-stakes testing. This is really the kind of downside of NCLB. In order to have high-stakes testing for accountability, you have to base the test on something. So you base them on the standards, which means that every time since 2000, when a state's science education standards have come up for revision, there has been a fight over the inclusion of evolution, because religious conservatives know that if evolution is in the standards, it's going to be on the tests. If it's going to be on the test, it's going to be taught. So if you don't want evolution to be taught, get it out of the standards, and that'll guarantee it. So we've had fights in state after state about the inclusion of evolution in state standards. So we get a lot of attacks on standards, and that's another thing that we could talk about at some point. Senator Santorum, formerly of Pennsylvania, he's still around, but he's no longer the senator there, presented a resolution of the Senate which was attached to No Child Left Behind. And this read, "Where topics are taught that may generate controversy, such as biological evolution, the curriculum should help students to understand the full range of scientific views that exist, why such topics may generate controversy, and how scientific discoveries can profoundly affect society." Well, this doesn't sound too objectionable, does it? Unless you know the history of this movement. And the first version of the Santorum Amendment, as it's come to be called, was much stronger. It didn't have evolution as a such as. It was when biological evolution is taught, we should do this. And basically, this was wording that Philip Johnson, the intelligent design theoretician, shall we say, Johnson provided wording to Santorum for this amendment to try to get a very innocuous sounding statement into No Child Left Behind, which they could then point to as requiring the teaching of the evidence against evolution. The full range of scientific views. Well, remember, the original scientific view was creation science, right? And then the next scientific view is intelligent design. So to these folks, the full range of scientific views means evolution and the various forms of creationism. So it's all in the wording. The Ohio legislature was another example of the wording of the full range of scientific views coming out of the Santorum Amendment language. Now, the Santorum Amendment, by the way, is buried way the hell down in the conference committee report. It has no force of law whatsoever, but it is used by religious conservatives to support their argument that teachers need to teach the full range of views, need to teach both sides, shall we say. Perhaps most importantly, in the Ohio Science Education Standards, in that same year, later rescinded, I might add, the idea that students shall describe how scientists continue to investigate and critically analyze aspects of evolutionary theory. It's probably worth just spending a moment on the wording here, because when we were helping our Ohio Citizens for Science groups fight this, the final wording, which you see before you, was a master of political compromise. The evolutionists said, well, clearly what this standard means is that students should critically analyze aspects of evolutionary theory. Sympatric speciation versus allopatric speciation, or perhaps Are dinosaurs warm-blooded or cold-blooded? There's lots of aspects of evolutionary theory that are in contention, and these would make very good critical thinking exercises for students. The creationists said, no. We want students to critically analyze evolution. In other words, we want students to be asking whether evolution occurred. A very different picture from aspects of evolution. And by the way, when you see the phrase critically analyze, it doesn't mean critically analyze. It means criticize. And we have plenty of evidence for that. Of course, when it comes to many aspects of scholarship, there is a right answer. The caption here is, maybe it's not a wrong answer, maybe it's just a different answer. Well, in many cases, there is a wrong answer. And when it comes to science, that is often the case. I want to spend a little bit of time before questions now on the Tennessee law, which just passed in the House, in the state legislature. The Senate bill is still pending. It's due for discussion on the 20th. Very likely will pass, and we will have our second Academic Freedom Act. But I want you to sit back, not be thinking about this history that I've just given you, or maybe other knowledge that you have about this controversy, and just try to look at this bill through the eyes of a person on the street, okay? An important purpose of science education is to inform students about scientific evidence and to help students develop critical thinking skills necessary to becoming intelligent, productive, and scientifically informed citizens. Everybody in favor of that, raise your hand. I'm in favor of that. Yeah. Sounds good, doesn't it? The teaching of some scientific subjects, including but not limited to biological evolution, the chemical origins of life, global warming, and human cloning, can cause controversy. Everybody agrees? Okay, do you agree that these things can cause controversy? Come on, boys and girls, you can, I'm not going to call on you. You can raise your hands. It's all right. Some teachers may be unsure of the expectations concerning how they should present information on such subjects. Is that okay? Yeah, teachers are. Trust me, teachers are. Okay. The State Board of Education and other administrators, a long laundry list here, shall endeavor to create an environment within public elementary and secondary schools that encourages students to explore scientific questions, learn about scientific evidence, develop critical thinking skills, and respond appropriately and respectfully to differences of opinion about controversial issues. Looks pretty good on the surface, huh? The podium just growled at me. I don't know why. Taken piece by piece, line by line, it's kind of hard to see why this is backdoor creationism. It's backdoor creationism. I showed you that slide from the Institute for Creation Research, so you wouldn't think, it's that Scott woman again. She sees creationists under every bed. They are out to get us, okay? You can find Academic Freedom Act sample legislation on websites around hither and yon. And they're always couched in terms of academic freedom for the teacher. Let me teach. Why can't I supplement my science class with current articles and balanced discussion? Linguistic note. Whenever you see the word balanced in the same paragraph as evolution, it's a creationist. This is just part of the linguistics here. Here's this nice student. Let me think. Why can't I be allowed to decide for myself what the truth is? Because you're in 7th grade, honey. Maybe it's a different answer. Maybe hydrogen has 3 atomically. The Discovery Institute has its own academic freedom petition. I will blow up for you the fine print here. Teachers should be protected from being fired, harassed, intimidated, or discriminated against for objectively presenting the scientific strengths and weaknesses of Darwin's theory. Students should be protected from being harassed, intimidated, etc. how many students are harassed for holding creationist views? Give me a break. I mean, I hear from college professors all over the country. Students are forever writing little marginal notes about this is all a lot of crap. That's fine. You pass the kid anyway if he gets this stuff right. Well, you folks have not been paying attention to the demise of evolution, clearly. That's a joke. You can. There actually was this furniture store in Berkeley called Evolution, and it went out of business, and I thought, well, okay. This is worth a picture. So why do we have to pay attention to creationism? Well, because this is not your grandfather's creationism. This is more subtle, it's less vulnerable to legal challenge, it's likely to resonate with most members of society, it's likely to be tougher to handle in court, and frankly, if more of these bills pass, and unfortunately there tends to be something of a cascade effect. First was Louisiana. Tennessee is very likely. There's some other in the wings. This might shake them loose, but then there's always, we take an evolutionary view, a long term. There's always 2012, 2013, 2014. If more and more bills of this nature are passed, this is going to have a significant effect upon, among other things, the textbook industry, which is very easy to panic into decreasing the coverage of evolution. And, of course, there is about 25 to 30% of teachers who would like to teach creationism anyway. And these bills basically give them an open door to do so. And, of course, the Discovery Institute is front and center with a publication that will provide the evidence for evolution, the evidence against evolution, without mentioning religion. Explore Evolution is the content of intelligent design. In other words, evolution doesn't work, therefore intelligent design is real, without mentioning the therefore intelligent design is true part. It just says, evolution is terrible science. Look at all the weaknesses. And then the students themselves will come to the conclusion that, well, that must mean creationism is true, therefore. And we really need to watch the textbook publishers so that they don't backslide in this manner. So what to do about this? Well, I encourage you to stay informed. NCSE.com can provide information on this topic. I'll show you our website and where to go for that. Let us know if you're willing to help. If bills get introduced in your states, we can put you in touch with like-minded people and increase your probability of being effective in your work. But realize that, frankly, it's the long-term solution that we have to work for. The current Supreme Court, the current set of district court judges take a somewhat different attitude toward the Establishment Clause from the justices in the 80s and the 90s. And we may not be able to count on the courts in the future. The only long-term solution, frankly, is educational. Teachers have to do a better job of teaching evolution in K-12, but what that means is that university professors, many of whom are in this audience or watching this on the DVDs that will be distributed later on, you've got to do a better job of teaching evolution and teaching the nature of science, because the people who become teachers learn their science in your classes. And if they don't know why evolution is sound science and why it needs to be taught, it's not the fault of the School of Education. That's the fault of the science professors. And what needs to be done is not just to beef up the class on evolution, but to think about how you can bring evolution into every week of your class, how you can bring common ancestry into cell biology, how you can bring it into biochemistry, how you can bring it into every class. Because truly, common ancestry is the idea that tells you why biological things are like they are. And if you can bring that in explicitly to your students, then you will graduate an educated citizenry that's much less likely to be sucked in by these kinds of bills. All right, NCSE.com. If you go to this little button over here, you can sign up for a free electronic newsletter that comes out every Friday. Glenn Branch does it. It's wonderful. If you go to this button that says News, you get taken to this page where you can find lots of depressing information. You can sort by state or by year and find out a lot of what's going on in the creation and evolution issue. And obviously, we'd be delighted if you joined, since we're a membership organization. Glenn Branch is my deputy director. Robert Lunn is our communications director. Eric Mickle is our education director. Peter Hess is our faith community outreach. And our dear flare-ups wranglers, Josh Rosenow and Steve Newton, are the ones who answer the phone when people call because they elected the wrong school board. Actually, we all help with flare-ups, but those two guys really are on the front lines. And, of course, we have, like all right-minded nonprofits, a Facebook site and a YouTube site. The picture there is Steve Gould from a video that we made a while ago holding the best biological bumper sticker around, NCSE's Honk If You Understand Punctuated Equilibria. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this wonderful conference.